The coffee cup trembled in my hand as I stared at the message on my daughter's phone, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might shatter my ribs. The words blurred through my tears, but I'd already read them enough times to have them burned into my memory forever. Don't worry, the old woman won't last much longer. Then everything will be ours. Just keep playing along. My own daughter, my Lily, the child I had carried, nurtured, sacrificed everything for, was sitting in some restaurant right now, laughing about my imminent death with her husband, like it was just another item on their grocery list. My name is Catherine Pierce. I'm 63 years old, a retired high school English teacher who spent 35 years shaping young minds in the suburbs of Portland. I lost my husband Marcus to a sudden heart attack 4 years ago. And since that gray November morning, when I found him collapsed in our garden, I've been navigating this world alone. Or so I thought. The house feels too big now, filled with echoes of a life that once hummed with warmth and conversation. But I had Lily. I believed I had Lily. My only child. My beautiful daughter with her father's green eyes and my stubborn chin. A girl who used to crawl into my lap during thunderstorms and whisper that she loved me more than all the stars in the sky. That morning started like any other Tuesday. Rain drummed against the kitchen windows while I prepared my usual breakfast. Oatmeal with blueberries and a drizzle of honey. The kind Marcus used to make for me when we were young and still believed the world was kind. Lily had called the night before, asking if she could stop by to borrow my car for the day. Hers was in the shop, she said, something about the transmission making strange noises. Of course I agreed. I always agreed. What kind of mother says no to her daughter? She arrived around 9, her designer coat damp from the rain, her blonde hair pulled back in that severe ponytail she'd adopted since marrying Derek 3 years ago. Everything about her had become severe since that wedding, sharper, colder, like she'd shed some essential softness and replaced it with angles and edges I didn't recognize. But she was still my daughter. I still saw the little girl who used to dance in our living room, spinning until she got dizzy and collapsed in giggles on the carpet. We chatted about nothing important while she drank the coffee I'd made. She mentioned needing the car to run errands, perhaps look at some furniture for the house she and Derek had just purchased in the Pearl District. That beautiful Victorian with the wraparound porch that I had helped finance with $20,000 from the savings Marcus and I had carefully accumulated over decades. She kissed my cheek when she left, a quick, perfunctory gesture that barely made contact with my skin, and told me she'd have the car back by evening. But then 2 hours later, my phone rang. It was Lily, her voice bright and unbothered. "Mom, I'm so sorry, but Derek and I decided to grab lunch since we're both out. The car is fine where it is. I'll bring it back tomorrow instead, okay? Tomorrow instead of tonight. A small change, barely worth noting." Except she'd left her phone on my kitchen counter, plugged into the charger by the coffee maker, forgotten in her hurry to leave. I hadn't meant to look at it. I'm not the kind of mother who snoops, who violates her child's privacy. But it kept buzzing, message after message lighting up the screen. And I thought maybe it was something urgent, maybe Derek trying to reach her, maybe something I should let her know about. So, I picked it up, and I saw his name, Derek, a string of messages that made my blood run cold. "How much longer do we have to keep this up?" he'd written. "Not much longer," Lily had replied. "She's 63 and already having health issues. Another year, maybe 2. Then the house is ours, the life insurance, all of it. And she doesn't suspect anything? Are you kidding? She's so desperate for my attention she'd give me anything I asked for. The sad part is she actually thinks I visit because I love her." I read through months of messages, each one a knife twisting deeper into my chest. They'd been planning this, strategizing, calculating the worth of my life like I was a stock investment they were waiting to mature. The furniture shopping wasn't for their house. They already had everything they needed. It was for the house they planned to sell. My house, once I was gone. The health issues Lily mentioned, I'd told her in confidence about my high blood pressure, About the occasional chest pains my doctor said were probably just anxiety from grief. She'd held my hand and told me not to worry, that she'd always be there for me. And then she'd gone home and reported it all to Derek, like she was filing a status update on a project timeline. I sat at that kitchen table for an hour, maybe longer, the phone still in my hand, the rain still falling, the world still turning like nothing had changed. But everything had changed. The daughter I thought I knew was a stranger, a predator wearing my child's face, and I had been feeding her for years without realizing she was fattening me up for slaughter. Stay with me, because what I discovered next made me realize this betrayal ran deeper than I ever imagined, and what I decided to do about it would change everything. If you feel my words, show your support by liking the video and subscribing to the channel. And tell me from which city you belong, so I can see how far a woman's impactful voice can reach. Help me build this community so we can bring more truthful stories for you. After I composed myself, I did something I'd never done before. I forwarded several of those messages to my own phone, then carefully deleted any trace that I'd accessed Lily's device. My hands shook so badly I had to attempt it 3 times, but eventually I managed it. Then I placed her phone exactly where she left it, plugged in and charging, as if I'd never touched it at all. The rest of that Tuesday passed in a fog. I moved through my house like a ghost, seeing it through new eyes, understanding now that Lily didn't visit these walls because she loved me. She visited them because she was measuring their worth, calculating square footage and property value, planning which of my belongings she'd keep, and which she'd donate once I was no longer here to object. Every conversation we'd had over the past 3 years replayed in my mind with sickening clarity. Every time she'd asked about my finances, I'd thought she was concerned. Every time she'd encouraged me to update my will, I'd believed she wanted to make sure I was prepared. I'd been so blind, so pathetically grateful for any scrap of attention she threw my way, that I'd missed what was happening right in front of me. Marcus would have seen it. My husband had always been a better judge of character than me, more suspicious, more guarded. When Lily first brought Derek home 5 years ago, Marcus had pulled me aside after dinner and said, "There's something off about that man, Catherine. The way he looks at our home, at our things, like he's taking inventory." I'd dismissed his concerns, told him he was being overprotective, that Derek was just nervous about meeting us. 3 months later, Marcus was gone, his heart giving out while he pruned the roses he'd planted for our 30th anniversary. And Derek had been there at the funeral, his arm around Lily, whispering comfort, while his eyes surveyed the mourners, probably calculating how many of them might contest a will someday. That night, I barely slept. I lay in the bed I'd shared with Marcus for 33 years, staring at the ceiling, listening to the house settle around me. Every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of wind against the windows felt like the sound of my life being dismantled, piece by piece, by the person I'd trusted most in this world. By dawn, I'd made a decision. I wasn't going to confront Lily, not yet. I wasn't going to cry or rage or demand explanations. Instead, I was going to do something my daughter never expected from her sad, desperate, pathetically grateful mother. I was going to become someone she wouldn't recognize. Wednesday morning, I called my doctor's office and made an appointment for a full physical. I told the receptionist it was urgent, that I needed to understand exactly what was happening with my health. No vague reassurances or gentle dismissals. When Dr. Sarah Chen saw me that Friday, she ran every test imaginable. Blood panels, EKG, stress tests, imaging. And the results came back exactly as I'd suspected. My high blood pressure was manageable with medication I was already taking. The chest pains were indeed anxiety-related, exacerbated by grief and isolation. For a 63-year-old woman who'd lived through the loss of her husband, I was in remarkably good health. Dr. Chen smiled when she gave me the news, probably relieved she didn't have to deliver something worse. "You could easily live another 20, 30 years, Catherine," she said, squeezing my hand. Your mother made it to 92, didn't she? Good genes run in your family. I thanked her and left her office with a strange lightness in my chest. Not relief exactly, something sharper, something that felt dangerously close to power. Lily was counting on me dying soon, banking her entire future on my imminent demise. But I wasn't dying. I wasn't even particularly sick. I was just lonely and grief-stricken, and my daughter had mistaken that for weakness, for an expiration date she could circle on her calendar. Over the next few weeks, I began my research. I scheduled a meeting with Patricia Harlow, the estate attorney Marcus and I had used when we drafted our wills 15 years ago. Patricia was 70 now, sharp as ever, with silver hair and eyes that missed nothing. I told her everything. I showed her the messages I'd saved from Lily's phone, explained my suspicions, laid out the pattern of behavior I'd been too blind to see while it was happening. Patricia listened without interruption, her expression growing darker with each detail I shared. When I finished, she set down her pen and looked at me with something that might have been admiration. "Catherine," she said quietly, "what you're describing is elder abuse, financial exploitation. You could pursue legal action, get a restraining order, cut her off entirely." "I know," I replied, "but I don't want the law to handle this. I want to handle it myself." She studied me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Then let's talk about your options." What Patricia explained to me over the next hour changed everything. My current will was straightforward. Marcus and I had drafted it together, leaving everything to Lily as our sole heir. The house, the life insurance payout Marcus had left me, his pension, my retirement accounts, our savings, everything Marcus and I had built together, would pass directly to our daughter upon my death. It was what parents did. It was what we'd always assumed was right. But wills can be changed. Trusts can be established. Assets can be protected in ways that make them untouchable, even after death. Patricia walked me through every option, explaining the mechanisms of revocable living trusts, charitable remainder trusts, beneficiary designations that bypass probate entirely. She explained how I could maintain complete control over my assets while I lived, but ensure they were distributed according to my wishes, not my daughter's expectations, after I died. "The key," Patricia said, leaning forward, her voice low and conspiratorial, "is that Lily can't know any of this is happening. The moment she suspects you've discovered her plans, she'll change tactics. She'll apologize, cry, play the devoted daughter, and make it much harder for you to act clearly. So we do this quietly. We do this carefully. And we do this in a way that leaves her no room to challenge anything." I hired her on the spot. Over the next month, Patricia and I worked together to completely restructure my estate. We created a revocable living trust with me as the primary trustee and Patricia as my successor if I became incapacitated. We moved the house, the investment accounts, everything into that trust. We updated my life insurance policy, changing the beneficiary from Lily to the trust itself, with explicit instructions about how and when distributions could be made. We even added a clause that if anyone challenged the trust or attempted to prove me incompetent, they would forfeit their inheritance entirely. "It's called a no contest clause," Patricia explained. "It's not foolproof, but it makes fighting your wishes extremely expensive and risky. Most attorneys will advise against it. But the most important change we made was to the distribution schedule. Instead of Lily inheriting everything immediately upon my death, the trust stipulated that she would receive monthly payments, modest ones, enough to live comfortably, but not extravagantly, for the rest of her life. The principal would be protected, invested, managed by Patricia and a financial advisor I'd never met, but Patricia trusted implicitly. Lily couldn't sell my house because she wouldn't own it. The trust would. She couldn't access the lump sum she and Derek had been dreaming about because that lump sum no longer existed in any form she could touch. And the best part? If Lily demonstrated through her actions over time that she genuinely changed, if she showed remorse and rebuilt our relationship authentically, Patricia had discretion to increase her monthly distribution or even dissolve the restrictions entirely. But if she continued down her current path, treating me as an inconvenient obstacle between her and financial freedom, she'd live the rest of her life on an allowance, watching the fortune she'd tried to inherit slip through her fingers month by month, year by year, decade by decade. "It's not cruelty," Patricia said when she saw the expression on my face. "It's protection. You're protecting her from herself, from the person she's become. And you're protecting yourself from being nothing more than a bank account with a heartbeat." The documents were signed and notarized on a Thursday afternoon in October. Patricia stored the originals in her firm's vault. I kept copies in a safety deposit box at a bank across town, one Lily didn't know existed. When I walked out of Patricia's office that day, I felt something I hadn't felt since Marcus died. I felt like myself again. Not the broken widow Lily could manipulate. Not the desperate mother grateful for crumbs of affection. Just Catherine Pierce, a woman who'd spent 63 years learning that kindness wasn't weakness, but that allowing someone to exploit your kindness absolutely was. That evening, Lily called to ask if she could stop by on Saturday. "I miss you, Mom," she said, her voice dripping with false warmth. "I feel like we haven't spent enough time together lately. Maybe we could have lunch, just us girls." "I'd love that," I replied, matching her saccharine tone. "Why don't you come around noon? I'll make your favorite, chicken salad sandwiches with those little pickles you like." "Perfect," she said. "See you Saturday. Love you." "Love you too, sweetheart." I hung up and stared at the phone in my hand, marveling at how easily lies fall from a mouth that's had enough practice. She'd been lying to me for years, and I'd believed every word. Now it was my turn. But I wasn't finished yet. The legal protections Patricia had helped me establish were essential, but they were only one piece of the puzzle. I needed to understand the full scope of what Lily and Derek were planning, needed to know if there were other people involved, other schemes I hadn't discovered yet. And for that, I needed help from someone Lily would never suspect. His name was James Cordova, a private investigator Patricia had recommended. He was 58, a former police detective who'd gone private after retiring from the Portland Police Bureau. When I met him at a coffee shop downtown, I was struck by how ordinary he looked. Gray hair, weathered face, the kind of man you'd pass on the street without a second glance. Which, he later explained, was exactly why he was good at his job. I told him everything. He listened the same way Patricia had, without judgment, taking notes in a small leather notebook that looked like it had seen better days. When I finished, he closed the notebook and looked at me with tired, knowing eyes. "Mrs. Pierce," he said quietly, "I've been doing this work for 23 years. I've seen every kind of betrayal human beings are capable of inflicting on each other. But there's something particularly cruel about what your daughter's doing. It's calculated. It's patient. It's predatory. Can you help me?" I asked. "I can find out exactly what she's planning," he replied. "I can document everything, give you ammunition if you ever need it. But I have to warn you, once you know the truth, all of it, you can't unknow it. Some of my clients regret hiring me because what they learn destroys relationships that might have been salvaged. Are you sure you want to go down this road?" I thought about Marcus, about the life we'd built together, about the daughter we'd raised with so much love and hope. I thought about the little girl who used to climb into my lap during thunderstorms, and the stranger who now calculated my death like a business transaction. And I thought about the fact that I might live another 30 years, and I refused to spend those years looking over my shoulder, wondering when the knife would finally come. "I'm sure," I said. James started his investigation the next day. He was thorough and discreet, following Lily and Derek, documenting their movements, their conversations, their habits. He accessed public records, financial statements. Anything that can paint a picture of who they really were beneath the masks they showed me. And what he uncovered over the next 6 weeks was worse than anything I'd imagined. The full truth hit like an avalanche, and I wasn't prepared for the weight of it. James called me on a Tuesday evening, his voice more strained than usual. "Mrs. Pierce, I think we need to meet. I've found some things you need to see." We met at the same coffee shop the following morning. The rain had returned to Portland, turning the city gray and cold, matching the chill that had settled permanently into my bones since discovering Lily's betrayal. James arrived with a thick folder tucked under his arm, and when he spread its contents across our corner table, I understood why he'd sounded so grim on the phone. "This goes back further than you thought," he began, pulling out a series of photographs. "Derek and Lily didn't meet by accident 5 years ago. They were introduced by someone at a real estate investment seminar. Here, look at this." He showed me a photograph of Lily and Derek at what appeared to be a conference, both of them smiling, talking to a silver-haired man in an expensive suit. The date stamp showed it was 6 months before Lily had supposedly met Derek at a friend's birthday party. The story they'd always told us. "The man in the photo is named Richard Brennan," James continued. "He runs what's essentially a predatory matchmaking service, though he'd never call it that. He connects young, attractive people with older targets who have assets worth inheriting. Then he coaches them on how to position themselves, how to build trust, how to wait for the right moment." My stomach turned. "You're saying Lily was trained to do this?" "Not just Lily. Derek, too. They're a team, Mrs. Pierce, and they've done this before." He pulled out another document, a marriage certificate from 7 years ago. Derek had been married before, to a woman named Patricia Delmont, a widow in her late 50s who died just 18 months into their marriage. Heart attack, according to the death certificate. Natural causes. But the timing of it, coming right after she'd updated her will to name Derek as primary beneficiary, raised questions that were never formally investigated. Patricia's daughter tried to challenge the will, James explained. She claimed Derek had isolated her mother, convinced her to cut off her family, manipulated her into changing her estate planning. But she couldn't prove anything, and Derek walked away with a house in Lake Oswego and about $300,000 in cash and investments. He sold the house 6 months later and disappeared for a while. Then he surfaced at Richard Brennan's seminar, where he met your daughter. I felt like I couldn't breathe. "Are you telling me Derek killed that woman?" "I'm telling you the pattern is suspicious," James said carefully. "I'm telling you that your daughter married a man with a history of targeting vulnerable older people, and that marriage happened under circumstances that suggest she knew exactly what she was getting into. Whether she knew about Patricia Delmont specifically, I can't say, but she definitely knew what kind of man Derek was." He showed me more. Bank statements showing that Lily and Derek were drowning in debt, credit cards maxed out, a second mortgage on their house that they were already behind on. They'd been living far beyond their means for years, funded largely by the money I'd given them. The $20,000 for their house down payment, gone within 6 months, spent on furniture, clothes, trips to wine country, a lifestyle they couldn't actually afford. They'd been counting on me to die soon so they could clear their debts and start fresh. "There's one more thing," James said, his voice dropping even lower. "I've been monitoring their communications, with legal warrants where necessary. Last week, Derek started researching something that concerned me enough to flag it immediately." He pulled out printouts of search histories. How to prove someone is mentally incompetent. How to get power of attorney over an unwilling parent. How to have someone declared unfit to manage their own affairs. The implications crashed over me like ice water. They weren't just waiting for me to die naturally anymore. They were planning to have me declared incompetent so they could take control of my assets while I was still alive. If they succeed, James said grimly. They can move you into a care facility, sell your house, liquidate your accounts, and there's very little you could do to stop them once the legal process is in motion. And with your history of anxiety and your recent comments to Lily about chest pains and feeling overwhelmed, they probably think they have enough to build a case. I sat back in my chair, the reality of the situation settling over me like a shroud. My own daughter wasn't just waiting for me to die. She was actively trying to destroy my autonomy, my independence, everything that made me who I was. And she was doing it with the help of a man who might have already killed once to get what he wanted. "What do I do?" I whispered. James leaned forward, his expression intense. "You do exactly what you've already started doing. You protect yourself legally, which you've done through Patricia Harlow. You maintain the appearance of normalcy so they don't know you're aware of their plans, and you document everything. Every interaction, every request, every conversation, so that if they do try to move against you, you have evidence that you're completely competent and in control of your faculties." He pulled out a small device barely larger than a button. "I want you to start recording your interactions with them. This is completely legal in Oregon as long as one party, that's you, consents to the recording. Keep it on you whenever they visit. Let them talk. Let them show you who they really are. And when the time comes, when they finally make their move, you'll have everything you need to stop them." I took the device, feeling its weight in my palm. Such a small thing to carry such enormous power. What happens if they actually try to have me declared incompetent? Then Patricia will present evidence that you're perfectly sound. We'll have recordings demonstrating your clarity of mind. We'll have testimony from your doctors. We'll have financial records showing you've been making completely rational decisions about your estate. They won't win, Mrs. Pierce, but we have to be ready. I left that meeting with the folder James had compiled, evidence of a conspiracy that had been years in the making, and I understood something I'd been refusing to acknowledge. The daughter I'd loved was gone, if she'd ever truly existed at all. The woman who wore her face now was a predator, just like her husband, and I was nothing more than prey they'd been stalking with remarkable patience. That Saturday, Lily came for lunch as planned. I was ready. I wore the recording device James had given me, concealed beneath my cardigan, and I'd set up my phone in the kitchen to record as well, angled to look like I'd just forgotten it on the counter. When Lily arrived, she looked tired, dark circles under her eyes that makeup couldn't quite hide. For just a moment, I felt a flicker of my old maternal instinct, the urge to ask what was wrong, to comfort her. Then I remembered the messages on her phone, the calculations about my death, and the instinct died. "Mom," she said, kissing my cheek, that same perfunctory gesture that had become her signature. "Something smells amazing." "Just chicken salad," I replied, keeping my voice light. "And I made fresh lemonade. Why don't you sit down? I'll bring everything out." We ate on the back porch, overlooking the garden Marcus had loved. The roses were blooming despite the season, late fall flowers that shouldn't have survived but somehow persisted, beautiful and stubborn. Like me, I thought. Lily talked about surface things at first. A new restaurant she and Derek had tried, a movie she'd seen, some gossip about a mutual acquaintance. I listened and nodded and played my part. Then, as I'd known she would, she steered the conversation toward what she really wanted to discuss. "Mom, I've been worried about you," she said, reaching across the table to pat my hand. "You seem so isolated out here, all alone in this big house. Have you thought about maybe selling it? Moving into something smaller, more manageable?" "I love this house," I replied carefully. "Your father and I built so many memories here." "I know, and that's beautiful. But memories aren't the same as practical living situations." Her voice took on that practiced tone of concern that I now recognized as manipulation. "What if something happened to you? What if you fell and couldn't reach a phone? I worry about you every single day." "That's very sweet of you, darling." "I've been reading about these wonderful retirement communities," she continued, warming to her pitch. Places where you'd have people around, activities, healthcare right on site. You wouldn't have to worry about maintaining this property anymore, and you'd be safer. Are you suggesting I'm not capable of taking care of myself? She laughed, a light, dismissive sound. Of course not, Mom. I just mean that at your age, with your health issues, it makes sense to think about these things before a crisis forces your hand. At my age, with my health issues, the phrases landed exactly as she intended them. Small barbs designed to make me question myself, to make me feel older and weaker than I actually was. What kind of crisis are you worried about? I asked. Lily looked at me with those green eyes, Marcus's eyes, now cold and calculating in a way his never were. Mom, you told me yourself that you've been having chest pains, that you forget things sometimes, that you feel overwhelmed. Those are serious symptoms. I'd hate for something to happen because you were too proud to accept help. Help? I repeated. Is that what you'd call it? Something flickered across her face, suspicion maybe, or caution. What else would I call it? I smiled, channeling every ounce of the confused, fragile old woman she expected me to be. Nothing, sweetheart. I'm just feeling a bit emotional today. Ignore me. She relaxed immediately, my performance convincing enough to allay her concerns. We finished lunch, and before she left, she hugged me, an actual embrace that might have meant something if I didn't know the truth. Think about what I said, okay? About moving somewhere safer? Derek and I could help you look at places. We'd make sure you found something perfect. And then, I'll think about it, I promised. I watched her drive away in that expensive car I'd helped purchase, and I felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, nothing. She'd used up all my maternal emotion, drained me dry over the course of years. And now there was only clarity left. Cold, sharp, unforgiving clarity. And then, that evening, I listened to the recording of our conversation with James and Patricia. They both agreed that Lily's language was deliberately manipulative, designed to plant seeds of doubt about my competence, while positioning herself as the concerned, loving daughter just trying to help. She's building a narrative, Patricia said. If she ever does try to have you declared incompetent, she'll point to conversations like this as evidence that you were declining and she was trying to intervene. It's actually quite sophisticated. What's our countermove? I asked. Patricia smiled. We demonstrate that you're not just competent, you're thriving. Starting tomorrow, I want you to become visible. Take classes, join groups, volunteer, make new friends. I want a record of you engaging with your community in ways that show mental acuity, good judgment, and social awareness. Can you do that? I thought about the life I'd been living since Marcus died. Small and contained, centered entirely around waiting for Lily to visit, to call, to acknowledge my existence. I'd made myself small for her, thinking that's what mothers were supposed to do, make space for their children to grow. But she'd interpreted my smallness as weakness, my grief as deterioration, and now she was trying to use it to destroy me. I can do that, I said. I can do more than that. And I did. Over the next 2 months, I transformed my life in ways I'd never imagined possible. I enrolled in a watercolor painting class at the community center and discovered I had a decent talent for capturing landscapes. I joined a book club that met every Thursday evening at the local library, where I engaged in spirited debates about literature with 8 other women who appreciated my insights and opinions. I volunteered at a literacy program, tutoring adults who were learning to read, using skills from my teaching career that I'd thought were no longer relevant. I made friends, real friends, not people who tolerated me because they felt obligated. I had coffee dates and dinner parties. I went to movies and museums. I started hiking again, something Marcus and I used to do every weekend, and I found that my body was stronger than I'd given it credit for. Then Lily noticed. She called more frequently, her voice tight with poorly concealed frustration. "Mom, you're never home anymore. I've been trying to reach you all week." She said, "I've been busy, sweetheart. I joined a book club, and we went on a field trip to Powell's Books. You should see the beautiful volumes I found." Silence on the other end of the line, then, "That's great, Mom. I'm glad you're getting out. But don't you think you might be overdoing it? At your age, you should be careful not to exhaust yourself." Instead, "I feel wonderful," I replied honestly. "Best I felt in years, actually. The doctor says my blood pressure is better than ever." More silence. I could practically hear her recalculating, revising her timeline, realizing that the convenient narrative of her declining dependent mother was crumbling. "Well, that's wonderful. I'm so happy for you." But she wasn't happy, and as the months passed, her frustration grew more visible. She started showing up at my house unannounced, trying to catch me in moments of supposed confusion or weakness. She'd find me painting in my studio, or preparing for my book club meeting, or reviewing lesson plans for my tutoring students. Every time I greeted her with calm competence, offering her tea and pleasant conversation, while the recording device captured every word. Derek started accompanying her on these visits. That was new. He'd always kept his distance before, letting Lily handle the emotional manipulation while he remained in the background. But now he was there, watching me with those flat eyes, assessing, calculating. James had warned me that this might happen, that as their original plan fell apart, they might become more desperate, more aggressive. One Sunday afternoon in February, they both showed up with papers in hand. Lily's smile was strained as she spread documents across my kitchen table. "Mom, Derek and I have been talking, and we think it might be a good idea for me to have power of attorney, just as a precaution, in case anything happens and you need someone to help manage things." I looked at the papers, then at my daughter, then at her husband. Derek met my gaze without flinching, and I saw something in his expression that sent ice through my veins. Determination, threat, the look of a man who'd gotten away with things before and expected to get away with them again. "Why would I need that?" I asked calmly. "I'm perfectly capable of managing my own affairs." "Of course you are," Lily said quickly. "This is just a safety measure. You're 64 now, and things can change quickly. If you had a medical emergency, if you were in the hospital and couldn't make decisions for yourself, wouldn't you want someone you trust handling things?" "I already have medical directives in place," I replied, "and my attorney has all my healthcare proxy information." Derek leaned forward, his voice smooth and reasonable. "Catherine, Lily's your daughter. She should be the one making decisions for you, not some attorney you barely know. This is about family taking care of family." Part of speech. I almost laughed at the irony of him, of all people, invoking family as something sacred. Instead, I folded my hands on the table and looked at them both with the same pleasant, slightly confused expression I'd been practicing. "I'll think about it, but right now I need to get ready for my watercolor class. We're working on winter scenes today." Lily's jaw tightened. "Mom, this is important." "I understand, sweetheart, and I promise I'll consider it, but I really do need to go. You're welcome to stay and lock up when you leave." Strong part. I gathered my art supplies and left them sitting at my kitchen table with their unsigned power of attorney forms, their frustration hanging in the air like smoke. As I drove to my class, I called Patricia. "They just tried to get me to sign power of attorney documents," I said. "Did you sign anything?" "Of course not." "Good. That means they're getting desperate. They're running out of time and money, and they need access to your assets soon. This is when they're most dangerous, Catherine. Be very careful." I was careful. I was also ready. Because what Lily and Derek didn't know was that while they'd been plotting against me, I'd been building something they never anticipated. If you feel my words, show your support by liking the video and subscribing to the channel. And tell me from which city you belong, so I can see how far a woman's impactful voice can reach. Help me build this community so we can bring more truthful stories for you. The breaking point came in March, almost a year after I'd first discovered those messages on Lily's phone. Spring was returning to Portland, the cherry blossoms beginning to bloom, and I felt like I'd been living in a state of suspended animation, waiting for the other shoe to drop. It dropped on a Tuesday afternoon, when James called with urgency in his voice. "Mrs. Pierce, you need to listen to me very carefully. Derek just made contact with a man named Vincent Carlisle. He's a lawyer, but not the reputable kind. He specializes in competency hearings and conservatorships, and he's known for being very aggressive about getting court orders even when the evidence doesn't fully support them." My heart began to race. Are they moving forward with trying to have me declared incompetent? It looks that way. Derek and Lily met with Carlisle yesterday. I have surveillance photos of them leaving his office. And from what I've been able to piece together from their communications, they're planning to file a petition within the next 2 weeks. 2 weeks after everything I'd done to prove my competence? They were still going to try. What do? We get ahead of them, James said. We move first. That evening, I met with Patricia, James, and 2 other people who'd been working behind the scenes. Dr. Sarah Chen, my physician, and Dr. Michael Torres, a neuropsychologist that Patricia had arranged for me to see months ago as a precaution. Over the course of several sessions, Dr. Torres had conducted comprehensive cognitive testing, assessing my memory, my decision-making abilities, my mental status. The results, which he now presented to our small group, were unequivocal. I was in excellent cognitive health for someone my age, showing no signs of dementia, impairment, or diminished capacity. Catherine scores above average in every category we tested, Dr. Torres said. Her executive function is sharp. Her memory is intact. Her judgment is sound. If this goes to court, I would testify without hesitation that she is fully competent to manage her own affairs. It won't go to court, Patricia said firmly, because we're going to shut this down before they ever file that petition. She laid out her plan. Instead of waiting for Lily and Derek to make their move, we would strike first with a cease and desist letter that outlined every piece of evidence we'd gathered over the past year. The messages about waiting for me to die, Derek's history with Patricia Delmont, the suspicious timing of their financial problems, the pattern of manipulation and exploitation, the recordings of Lily deliberately trying to undermine my confidence in my own competence. All of it compiled into a devastating document that made clear we knew exactly what they'd been planning, and that any attempt to move forward would be met with legal action, public exposure, and potential criminal charges for elder abuse. This is scorched earth, Patricia warned me. Once we send this, there's no going back. Your relationship with Lily will be over. Are you prepared for that? I thought about the little girl who used to dance in our living room. I thought about the teenager who'd cried on my shoulder when her first boyfriend broke her heart. I thought about the young woman who'd walked down the aisle on Marcus's arm, smiling like she'd found her fairy tale ending. And then I thought about the stranger who'd sat at my kitchen table and calculated how much longer I'd live, who'd married a possible killer and conspired to destroy my autonomy, who'd been willing to sacrifice everything good and decent about human connection for money she hadn't earned and didn't deserve. She ended our relationship the day she started seeing me as a bank account instead of a mother. I said quietly, I'm just acknowledging the reality she created. The letter was sent via certified mail on a Thursday morning. James also delivered copies in person to make absolutely certain they received it. According to James, who was watching their house, Derek received his copy at 9:15 a.m. By 9:30, I could hear their car screeching to a stop in my driveway. They came in without knocking, both of them, fury written across their faces. I'd been expecting this. I'd positioned myself in the living room with my recording device active, my phone recording as well, and a panic button James had installed that would immediately alert him and the police if I needed help. What the hell is this? Derek shouted, waving the letter in the air. What kind of lies have you been filling your head with? Those aren't lies, I said calmly. Those are facts, documented and verified. Everything in that letter is true. You hired a private investigator? Lily's voice was shrill, disbelieving. You had us followed? You invaded our privacy? You left your phone on my counter, I replied. You discussed my death in text messages like you were planning a vacation. And you've been systematically trying to undermine my confidence so you could justify taking control of my life. And then this El Sue. We were trying to help you. Help me? I stood up, feeling something fierce and cold rising in my chest. Lily, you were counting down the days until I died. You married a man who may have killed his first wife. You've been drowning in debt and seeing my death as your financial solution. That's not help. That's predation. Derek stepped forward, and I saw James's warning playing out in real time. His expression was dangerous, threatening in a way that confirmed every suspicion I'd had about what he might be capable of. You stupid old woman. You have no idea what you've done. I know exactly what I've done. I've protected myself from both of you. Protected yourself? Lily laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. With what? A letter from your lawyer? You think that stops anything? The letter is just the opening move, I said. Everything you've planned, everything you've done is documented. I have recordings of you trying to convince me I'm incompetent. I have evidence of Derek's history. I have testimony from doctors confirming that I'm in perfect mental health. And I have a new estate plan that ensures neither of you will see a cent of my money if you continue down this path. The color drained from Lily's face. You changed your will? I created a trust. Everything Marcus and I built is protected now, managed by people who actually care about my well-being rather than my death. If you proceed with any legal action against me, if you try to have me declared incompetent, if you do anything besides walk away right now, you'll spend the rest of your lives fighting a legal battle you cannot win. And when it's over, you'll have nothing. Derek moved toward me, but at that exact moment, James appeared in the doorway. He must have been watching the house, waiting for exactly this scenario. His presence stopped Derek mid-step. I believe Mrs. Pierce asked you to leave, James said calmly, but there was steel in his voice. For a long moment, everyone froze. Derek's hands were clenched into fists, his face red with rage. Lily was crying, mascara streaming down her cheeks. Though whether from genuine emotion or calculated performance, I could no longer tell. And I stood there, finally feeling like I was standing on solid ground instead of the shifting sand my daughter had been creating beneath my feet for years. You'll regret this, Derek said, his voice low and threatening. The only thing I regret is not seeing who you were sooner, I replied. They left. I watched from my window as they got into their car and drove away, probably back to Vincent Carlisle's office to explain how their carefully constructed plan had just imploded. James stayed for a while, making sure I was okay, confirming that the recordings had captured everything. That went better than I expected, he said. Derek wanted to do something violent. I could see it in his eyes. But he's smart enough to know that with me here as a witness, he'd have nothing to gain and everything to lose. I sank onto my couch, the adrenaline draining from my body, leaving me exhausted. Is it over? That depends on them. If they're smart, they'll accept that you've outmaneuvered them and move on to easier targets. If they're desperate enough, they might try something else. We'll keep monitoring, keep watching. But Catherine, he smiled. You did good today. You were strong. Strong. I'd never thought of myself that way. I'd been someone's wife, someone's mother, someone's teacher. Those were my identities, roles I played in service to other people. But maybe, finally, I was learning to be just Catherine, a woman who wouldn't be diminished or destroyed by people who mistook her kindness for weakness. That night, I barely slept. Every sound in the house made me jump. Every shadow seemed threatening. But morning came, and with it, a strange sense of peace. I'd done it. I'd protected myself. I'd refused to be a victim. And whatever came next, I'd face it on my own terms, not theirs. But I should have known it wasn't over. People like Derek don't give up that easily, And what happened next would test everything I built. The silence that followed their confrontation in my living room lasted exactly 3 days. 3 days of relative peace where I started to believe, foolishly, that maybe they'd actually walk away, cut their losses, and find some other target to exploit. On the 4th day, I received a call from my bank. "Mrs. Pierce, this is Amanda Westbrook from Fraud Prevention. We've detected some unusual activity on your accounts and wanted to verify some recent transactions with you." My stomach dropped. What kind of activity? 3 attempts to wire large sums of money to offshore accounts over the past 48 hours. The amounts were significant enough to trigger our security protocols, so the transactions were frozen, pending verification. Can you confirm whether you authorized these transfers? Absolutely not. That's what we suspected. The attempts were made using your account information, but the authentication codes failed. It appears someone has access to your personal banking details. We'll need you to come in immediately to secure your accounts and file a formal fraud report. I called Patricia before I even hung up with the bank. They're trying to steal my money directly, wire transfers. Damn it. Patricia's usual calm cracked slightly. That's desperate and reckless. If they'd succeeded, it would have been easily traceable back to them. They're panicking. We spent that afternoon at the bank, changing every access code, creating new security measures, documenting the attempted fraud. Amanda Westbrook, the fraud prevention specialist, was a sharp woman in her 40s with the no-nonsense demeanor of someone who'd seen every scam imaginable. "Mrs. Pierce, whoever did this had your account numbers, your social security number, and at least partial access to your security information. That level of detail suggests someone very close to you, someone who's had access to your personal documents." "My daughter," I said flatly. It was my daughter and her husband. Amanda's expression didn't change, but I saw sympathy flicker in her eyes. She'd probably heard this story before in different variations, family members targeting their elderly relatives for financial exploitation. "We'll report this to the authorities. With the amount they attempted to steal, this is felony wire fraud. The FBI typically handles cases involving offshore accounts." The FBI. The words hung in the air like thunder. My daughter might go to prison. James had predicted this possibility. When con artists get exposed, they either disappear to find new victims, or they double down and try to salvage whatever they can through increasingly reckless means. Derek's type usually doubles down. He was right. Over the next 2 weeks, the attacks escalated. Someone, and we all knew who, but proving it was another matter entirely, had filed false reports with Adult Protective Services, claiming I was being exploited by my attorney and my private investigator, that I was showing signs of dementia and being manipulated into changing my estate plans against my actual wishes. I had to sit through an evaluation with a social worker named Karen Delacroix, a tired-looking woman with kind eyes who clearly dealt with too many tragic situations and not enough resources. She came to my home, interviewed me for 2 hours, reviewed my medical records, spoke with Dr. Chen and Dr. Torres, and examined the evidence Patricia provided about my cognitive health and the actual situation with Lily and Derek. "Mrs. Pierce," she said finally, "I've seen a lot of elder abuse in my career, and what's happening to you is textbook financial exploitation with attempted isolation. You're clearly competent and making informed decisions about protecting yourself. I'm going to close this case with a finding of unsubstantiated allegations. But I want you to know, whoever filed this report was very convincing. They presented themselves as concerned family members who just wanted help for their declining mother. If you hadn't already established such a clear documentation trail, this could have gone very differently. Can you tell me who filed the report?" "I can't disclose that officially, but let's just say it was a female caller who identified herself as your daughter." After Karen left, I sat in my kitchen and tried to process what my life had become. I was 64 years old, supposedly in the golden years of retirement. and instead I was fighting off my own child who was trying to destroy me through every legal and illegal means available. The woman I'd given birth to, nursed through childhood illnesses, cheered for at school plays and graduations, helped through her first heartbreak, that woman was now weaponizing social services against me, trying to get me locked away in a care facility so she could loot everything Marcus and I had worked for. The doorbell rang, interrupting my dark thoughts. I approached cautiously, checking through the peephole first. It was a young woman I didn't recognize, maybe late 20s, with dark hair pulled back in a ponytail and nervous eyes. I opened the door but kept the chain lock engaged. "What are you doing here?" "Mrs. Pierce? My name is Rebecca Novak. I need to talk to you about Derek Holloway. Please, it's important." I opened the door but kept the chain lock engaged. "Who are you?" "I'm Patricia Delmont's daughter, Derek's first wife. The one who died?" The words sent electricity through me. I fumbled with the chain and opened the door fully. "Come in, please, come in." Rebecca Novak sat in my living room, perched on the edge of the couch like she might bolt at any moment. She clutched a folder in her hands, the edges worn from being handled repeatedly. When she spoke, her voice shook. "I saw your name in a news article about the fraud investigation. The FBI had to disclose the victim's name in their filings, and when I saw it was connected to Derek Holloway, I knew I had to reach out. Mrs. Pierce, my mother didn't die of natural causes. I know she didn't, and I think Derek is planning to do the same thing to you." "Tell me everything," I said. Rebecca's story came out in a rush, like she'd been holding it back for years, and finally found someone who might listen. Her mother, Patricia, had been 57 when she met Derek at a charity fundraiser. She'd been widowed for 3 years, lonely, vulnerable, and Derek had swept her off her feet with attention and affection she'd been craving. They married within 6 months. "At first everything seemed fine," Rebecca said. "Derek was charming, attentive, maybe a little too interested in Mom's finances, but I figured he was just trying to be helpful. Then Mom started changing. She stopped calling me as often. When we did talk, she seemed confused, forgetful, not like herself at all. She'd forget conversations we'd just had, misplace things, say things that didn't make sense." "Did she see a doctor?" "Derek took her to doctors, plural. He shopped around until he found one who diagnosed her with early onset dementia. That's when he convinced her to update her will, give him power of attorney, put him on all her accounts. He said it was necessary to protect her." The parallels to my own situation were chilling. "What happened to your mother, Rebecca?" "She had a massive heart attack 6 months later. She was only 58, had no previous heart problems, was taking medication for blood pressure, but nothing else. The night she died, she'd been fine at dinner. Then around 11 p.m., she started having chest pains. Derek called 911, performed CPR, did everything right. But by the time the paramedics arrived, she was gone. Why do you think it wasn't natural?" Rebecca opened her folder and pulled out documents. "Because after she died, I found these. Medical records Derek didn't know she'd kept copies of. Her dementia diagnosis? The doctor who made it lost his license 2 years later for fraudulent diagnoses in multiple conservatorship cases. The medications she'd been taking? Some of them can cause confusion and memory problems, especially in combinations Derek was managing. And this, she pulled out a toxicology report. I paid for a private autopsy, but by the time I could arrange it, she'd already been cremated per Derek's instructions, so they could only test what was left. But they found elevated levels of digoxin in her system. It's a heart medication she wasn't supposed to be taking. Digoxin poisoning can cause heart attacks, I said, my mind racing. Exactly. But I couldn't prove anything. The police said the evidence was circumstantial, that the digoxin could have been a medication error, that her death certificate said natural causes. Derek inherited everything. and within a year, he'd disappeared. I've been tracking him ever since, trying to find proof, trying to warn his next victims. But I'm not a lawyer or an investigator, and no one takes me seriously. They think I'm just a bitter daughter who couldn't accept her mother's death. I looked at this young woman who'd spent years seeking justice for her mother, and I felt a kinship with her that went beyond our shared connection to Derek. We were both women fighting against men who thought they were untouchable, both refusing to be dismissed or silenced. Rebecca, would you be willing to share all of this with my attorney and my investigator? Would you be willing to testify if it comes to that? Her eyes filled with tears. Yes. God, yes. If it means stopping him from doing this to someone else, I'll do whatever you need. I called James immediately. When he arrived and heard Rebecca's story, his expression turned grim. This changes everything. If we can connect Derek's pattern to your situation, show that he's done this before, we move from civil litigation to potential criminal charges. But Mrs. Pierce, we need to be very careful how we proceed. If Derek realizes we have this information, he might cut his losses and run. Or, he paused significantly, he might accelerate his timeline with you. Meaning what? Meaning if he thinks his window of opportunity is closing, he might try something direct, something violent. The fear that had been abstract suddenly became very real. You think he'd actually try to kill me? He may have done it before. The question is whether he's desperate enough to risk doing it again. I'm going to recommend 24-hour security for you, starting immediately. That night, I didn't sleep at all. A security company James trusted had installed cameras, alarms, and a panic system throughout my house. An armed guard named Marcus, the coincidence of the name didn't escape me, sat in a car outside my driveway. My home, my sanctuary, the place where I'd raised my daughter and built my life with my husband, had become a fortress. And I was a prisoner inside it, not because of anything I'd done, but because the child I'd loved had married a monster, and together they'd decided I was worth more dead than alive. The next morning brought a call from Patricia. Catherine, Derek's attorney, Vincent Carlisle, just filed an emergency petition for guardianship. They're claiming you're in immediate danger due to impaired judgment, that you're being financially exploited by your attorney and your investigator, and that you've become paranoid and delusional. They're asking for an emergency hearing within 48 hours. Can they do that? Just file an emergency petition based on lies? They can file anything. Whether a judge will grant it is another matter. But we need to be prepared. This is their final play. If they can get temporary guardianship, even for a few days, they can move you into a facility, lock you away, and start dismantling your estate before we can stop them. What do? You show up at that hearing, and you show that judge exactly how competent and clear-minded you are. And Catherine, you tell your story. All of it. No more being quiet. No more protecting Lily's image. You tell the truth, and you let the judge see who these people really are. The emergency hearing was scheduled for Friday at 2 p.m. I spent the intervening hours with Patricia, preparing my testimony, reviewing the evidence we'd compiled, steeling myself for what was coming. Dr. Torres would testify. Dr. Chen would testify. James would present his findings. Rebecca would tell her mother's story. And I would finally speak the truth out loud in a forum where it mattered, where it had legal weight, where my daughter couldn't dismiss it or manipulate it or turn it against me. Phrase, end of paragraph, ender paragraph. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. Less dramatic. Judge Helen Morrison presided, a woman in her early 60s with steel gray hair and sharp eyes. Lily and Derek sat with Vincent Carlisle at one table. Both of them dressed impeccably, playing the role of concerned family members. Derek even had the audacity to look sad, worried, like he was here reluctantly, forced into legal action by genuine concern for my welfare. I sat with Patricia at our table, my hands folded calmly in my lap, every inch the composed, rational woman I'd worked so hard to become over the past year. If I was scared, if I was heartbroken, if I was angry, none of it showed on my face. I'd learned from the best, from my daughter who'd been playing roles and manipulating emotions her entire adult life. Carlyle presented his case first. He painted a picture of me as a declining, vulnerable woman being manipulated by predatory professionals who'd isolated me from my loving family and convinced me to change my estate plans. He submitted the Adult Protective Services report, conveniently leaving out that it had been closed as unsubstantiated. He brought in a doctor who'd never examined me, but testified about the general cognitive decline typical in women my age. He made me sound like I was one step away from wandering into traffic in my nightgown. Then it was our turn. Patricia began by calling Dr. Torres to the stand. He methodically destroyed Carlyle's narrative with test results, cognitive assessments, and professional opinions that made clear I was not only competent, but functioning at a level higher than average for my age. Dr. Chen followed, presenting my medical history and explaining that my health was excellent, that there was no evidence of dementia or cognitive impairment, and that I was fully capable of making my own decisions. James presented next, and this is where things got interesting. He laid out the entire history, the messages about waiting for me to die, Derek's background with Patricia Delmont, the attempted wire fraud, the pattern of manipulation and exploitation. He presented recordings of Lily deliberately trying to undermine my confidence. He showed financial records proving their debt, their desperation, their motive. Then Patricia called Rebecca Novak to the stand. Lily's face went pale as Rebecca was sworn in. Derek's jaw tightened. They hadn't known this was coming. Rebecca told her mother's story with quiet, devastating clarity. She presented the documents she'd kept for years, the fraudulent dementia diagnosis, the suspicious medications, the elevated digoxin levels, the pattern that matched almost exactly what Derek and Lily had been trying to do to me. When she finished, the courtroom was silent except for the sound of Lily crying, though whether from genuine emotion or calculated performance, I still couldn't tell. Finally, Patricia called me to the stand. I took the oath with a steady voice and sat down, looking directly at Judge Morrison. She studied me for a long moment, then nodded slightly, inviting me to speak. Your Honor, I began, my name is Catherine Pierce. I'm 64 years old. I have a master's degree in English education. I taught high school for 35 years, and I spent the last year discovering that my only child sees me as nothing more than an obstacle between her and a financial windfall. I told my story, all of it, the messages I'd found, the realization of betrayal, the careful documentation, the attempted power of attorney grab, the wire fraud, the false reports, the escalating desperation. I spoke clearly without anger or hysteria, just stating facts in the same tone I used to use when teaching literary analysis. These are the themes. These are the plot points. This is what the evidence tells us about character and motivation. Strong. When I finished, Judge Morrison leaned forward. Mrs. Pierce, I'm going to ask you some questions directly. I want you to answer honestly. Of course, Your Honor. Do you love your daughter? The question surprised me. I thought about it for a long moment. I love who I thought she was, the little girl I raised, the young woman I believed I knew. But I don't know who she is now. The person sitting in this courtroom has shown me through her actions that she values money more than she values me, and I've had to accept that the daughter I loved may never have truly existed, or if she did, she's gone now. So do I love her? I love a memory, Your Honor, but memories aren't the same as reality. If I deny this petition, if I rule that you're fully competent and allow you to maintain complete control over your affairs, what do you plan to do regarding your daughter and son-in-law? I plan to continue living my life. I plan to protect myself legally and financially, and I plan to have no further contact with them unless they can demonstrate, through actions, not words, that they've genuinely changed. I don't wish them harm, Your Honor. I just want them to leave me alone. Judge Morrison wrote notes for what felt like an eternity, and she looked up at Carlyle. "Counselor, I've reviewed your petition and the evidence presented by both parties. I find no credible evidence of cognitive impairment or diminished capacity. What I do find is a pattern of financial exploitation, attempted fraud, and emotional manipulation directed at a competent woman by her own daughter and son-in-law." She turned to Lily and Derek. "I'm denying your petition for guardianship in its entirety. Furthermore, I'm issuing a restraining order that prohibits both of you from contacting Mrs. Pierce or attempting to access any of her financial accounts or personal property. Any violation of this order will result in immediate arrest and prosecution." Lily stood up, her voice shaking. "Your Honor, please. She's my mother. I was just trying to help her." "No, Miss Holloway," Judge Morrison said coldly. "You were trying to exploit her. There's a difference. And I suggest you retain criminal defense counsel, because based on the evidence presented here today, particularly regarding the wire fraud attempts, I'm referring this case to the district attorney's office for potential prosecution." The gavel came down with a crack that echoed through the courtroom like thunder. It was over. Lily and Derek were escorted out by court security, their faces ashen. Carlyle gathered his papers in silence, probably already calculating how to distance himself from clients who'd just been exposed as elder abusers in open court. Rebecca Novak embraced me in the hallway, both of us crying. Two women who'd fought against the same monster, and finally won. That night, I sat in my living room with a glass of wine, the restraining order on the coffee table in front of me, and I called my friend Margaret from book club. "It's over," I told her. "I won." "Of course you did," she said warmly. "You were always stronger than they understood. What happens now?" I looked around my home, at the life I'd rebuilt from the ashes of betrayal, at the future stretching out ahead of me, mine to shape however I chose. Now I live, really live, not for anyone else, not in service to roles I think I'm supposed to play. Just for me, for Catherine. "That sounds perfect," Margaret said. "Want to come over tomorrow? I'm making my famous lasagna." "I'd love that." The restraining order was permanent. The FBI investigation into the wire fraud led to charges against both Derek and Lily. Derek, facing potential prison time and the weight of Rebecca's testimony about Patricia Delmont, fled the country before his trial, disappearing somewhere in Southeast Asia where extradition would be difficult. A warrant was issued, but I knew I'd probably never see him again. Good riddance. Lily pleaded guilty to attempted wire fraud and received 3 years probation, community service, and mandatory counseling for financial crimes. She wrote me a letter 6 months later, delivered through Patricia since direct contact was prohibited by the restraining order. It was 3 pages of apologies, explanations, justifications, everything I'd expected and nothing I needed. I read it once, then filed it away in a folder marked Lily that I kept in the back of a drawer. I didn't respond. I didn't know what I would say, but I did make one change to my estate plan. Working with Patricia, I set up a smaller trust specifically for Lily, separate from my main estate. It would provide her with $20,000 a year for the rest of her life. Enough to live modestly but not extravagantly. Enough to keep her from destitution, but not enough to waste on luxuries she hadn't earned. The trust was irrevocable, couldn't be touched or accessed as a lump sum, and would terminate upon her death, with the remainder going to literacy programs for adults. The same program I'd been volunteering with. "It's more than she deserves," Patricia said when we finalized the documents. "It's not about what she deserves," I replied. "It's about who I am. I'm not cruel, Patricia. I'm just done being a victim. The rest of my estate, the house, the investments, the savings, all of it would go to organizations that had meant something to Marcus and me. Scholarships for first-generation college students, funding for public libraries, support for arts education in schools. Our money would help strangers build better lives, instead of funding the lifestyle of a daughter who'd chosen greed over love." I never saw Lily again. Sometimes I wondered if she thought about me, if she regretted her choices, if she ever mourned the relationship we could have had. But mostly, I didn't think about her at all. I'd made my peace with the loss, grieved the daughter I'd thought I had, and accepted that some relationships are meant to end, even the ones that begin with biology and DNA. A year after the hearing, on a bright Saturday in June, Margaret and I hosted a garden party at my house. The backyard was full of friends from book club, from my watercolor class, from the literacy program. We ate and laughed and told stories, and at one point I looked around at all these people who'd chosen to be in my life, not because of blood or obligation, but because they genuinely enjoyed my company. And I felt something I hadn't felt in years. If you feel my words, show your support by liking the video, and tell me from which city you belong so I can see how far a woman's impactful voice can reach. Help me build this community so we can bring more truthful stories for you. Marcus would have loved this, I thought. He would have loved seeing me happy again, seeing me surrounded by real friends instead of people who only valued what I could give them. And maybe that was his final gift to me. All those years of love and partnership that showed me what genuine connection looked like, that gave me the strength to recognize betrayal when I saw it, and the courage to fight back. My name is Catherine Pierce. I'm 65 years old now. I paint watercolors that hang in the local community center. I tutor adults learning to read. I have coffee dates and dinner parties. I travel sometimes, day trips to the coast, the mountains Marcus loved. I have a life that's mine, built on my terms, filled with people who see me as a whole person, not a resource to be extracted. And every morning when I wake up in the house that almost became my daughter's inheritance before I died, I feel grateful. Grateful that I found those messages when I did. Grateful for Patricia and James and Dr. Torres and all the people who helped me protect myself. Grateful for Rebecca Novak, who gave me the final piece of the puzzle I needed to understand who Derek really was. Grateful even, in a strange way, for Lily's betrayal, because it forced me to become someone I'd never been before. Someone strong. Someone who wouldn't be diminished. Someone who chose herself when everyone else was choosing to use her. This is my story. A story of betrayal and survival, of discovering that family isn't always defined by blood, and that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away from the people who taught you that your only value was in what you could give them. I lost a daughter, but I found myself. And in the end, that was the better trade. If someone had told me 5 years ago that my only child would spend years planning for my death, that I'd end up in court fighting for my own autonomy, that I'd rebuild my entire life without my daughter in it, I never would have believed them. The future seemed fixed, written in stone. Lily would inherit. I would fade away quietly, grateful for whatever scraps of attention she offered. That was the script I thought I was following. But life has a funny way of offering us rewrites when we're brave enough to pick up the pen. And I'm grateful every single day that I was brave enough to rewrite mine. To anyone listening who sees themselves in my story, who recognizes the manipulation, the exploitation, the people in their lives who see them as obstacles or resources rather than human beings deserving of love and respect, I want you to know this. You are stronger than you think. You deserve better than you're getting. And it's never too late to choose yourself, to protect yourself, to build a life that's yours and yours alone. Thank you for listening to my truth. Thank you for being part of this community where women's voices matter, where our stories of survival and strength can reach across miles and screens to touch other women who need to hear them. Please, like this video, subscribe to our channel, and tell me where you're listening from. Let's see how far our voices can carry, how many women we can reach, how much truth we can share. Because that's what we do here. We tell the truth, and the truth, no matter how painful, will always set you free.